What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Game Dev Unchained, the #1 game development podcast about game development and the lifestyle thereof. I am your host, Brandon Pham, and with me a special guest, Xalavier Nelson Jr. How you doing, Xalavier?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me.
All right, man. This is the part of the podcast where I introduce our guests, which is yourself, about yourself, right? If you don't mind kind of cluing in the audience where you've been, where you at, where you heading, just a little intro about everything that you've been doing.
So, yeah, my name is Xalavier. I run a studio called Strange Scaffold. We've released 12 games in the past 5 years, from El Paso Elsewhere, which recently had a film development announced around it, to Life Eater, a horror fantasy kidnapping sim about a druid living in modern day suburbia who has to sacrifice his neighbors to delay the end of the world on the behalf of a god that he isn't sure exists. I've worked on over 90 games in the past 8 years of my dev career, from indie to AAA. Before that, I was a journalist. I've had a wide and holistic set of experiences, and I try to use it to explore how to make games better, faster, cheaper, and healthier than the industry assumes is possible.
All right, man. Fantastic. So let's dig right from the get go. Right, your game that you guys are promoting right now is the concept is a kidnapping simulator, right?
Fantasy
with a horror fantasy setting, right? So let's just start off right off the bat. How did you come across with this idea and the beginnings of it? Yeah.
So I was talking with a friend about the Saw horror franchise, something that we both respect and appreciate a whole lot. We were talking about how we might make a game out of it. And my friend proposed an idea, and I came to that prompt with my own game development sensibilities and went, okay. So, especially having worked on licensed projects before, I don't think that you get an accurate or scope-friendly representation of the spirit of the Saw franchise having you build the traps or trying to escape from the traps. But the moment before people are brought into that scenario, the moment at which they are abducted, at which they are even chosen for abduction, that is an expression of the moral ambiguity and darkness of that universe that has a lot of space for mechanical interest, as well as narrative intrigue and useful discomfort, something that isn't just grotesque for the sake of it, but actually gets you to think about the world in a different way. And after I finished coming up with this idea, I was like, oh, dang, that's actually good. I want to make that. And so came up with an original setting, solved a lot of game design and setting problems to create hopefully the best context possible. And that resulted in the final version of Life Eater that you see today, which is a distinct universe that, boy howdy, it sure still is about looking into people's lives very intrusively to find the moment at which they are vulnerable, and then sacrificing them to a dark god, for a dark god, not to a dark god.
I think, with our medium, obviously, there's always been we've kind of been the forefront of simulation or training criminals or something like that, right? Obviously,
there's media controversies.
Yeah, with the sensitivity around the issue. I am a game developer. I'm a gamer. Grew up in GTA world, so to me, it's no, that's not how it works. But how do you kind of approach the balance between the intrigue, obviously it's interesting, and the sensitivity to kind of ward off this misconception, at least at the beginning?
For me, I think a really important piece of avoiding the worst version of any given concept like this is kind of just coming in through the door saying, we aren't trying to attract controversy. We aren't telling this story simply to titillate or to get people angry at the idea. The reason we're making this game is because the game has something to say, both through its mechanics and its setting, that couldn't be done otherwise. So having that very strong guiding star going in we made a game called Space Warlord Organ Trading Simulator.
Mhm.
And people, including my parents, were like, game about trading organs. And that game ended up on Game Pass because we were able to make the argument, especially once the game was unveiled, of like, hey, there's people out there who would make an organ trading simulator.
Yeah.
Not only is it a Space Warlord organ trading simulator, but you can very clearly see how organs become a medium for us to discuss other things. In this case, the nonsensical vagaries of late stage capitalism as applied to organs among the stars. The Strange Scaffold games in general, they range from stuff that's cute and wholesome, like an airport for aliens currently run by dogs, to things like Life Eater. But whenever we're approaching that territory, I think that priority on nuance and on saying something outside of, hey, we made a game about this grotesque thing, means that we avoid a lot of the pitfalls that games have historically entered into, frankly, just kind of doing that, right? Saying, hey, what if we made a game that is simply about the darkness of humanity, but without anything further to say or express beyond that point?
Yeah, like I think the most important thing, as I was learning about the game, like there are obviously subject matters that are happening right now, right? And I think this gives an opportunity to kind of highlight like what's going on, and like you said, be a conversation starter. Like recently, I was in Dallas, Houston, Texas, right? And I was kind of near your town ish, right? Never been in
About 8 hours east.
8 hour east, but in Texas, to me, it's all like Texas. That's how bad my geography is. But like in Houston, like right when I got there, the ambient alerts kept like going off. It was like, I think I stayed there for 3 days. And then every like 2-3 hours, the amber alerts is like another kidnapping, another. I was like, I had no idea how much of an issue it was.
And one of the big concern points for that, especially because you would think in a digital world that it's harder to lose somebody.
Right.
But when I was growing up, I was maybe the last age of people on the internet who were told, you don't give your real name, you don't give your real location,
Right.
especially if you're gone from your house, and you don't give out a bunch of different pertinent details about yourself. That can be used to steal your passwords.
Yeah.
That can be used to prey upon you, especially if you're a kid. And now, regardless of age group, people will go on vacation and take photos that are geo-linked to their current location while they're away from their house in a different location. Or, they use their real name, they use their real photos, they input the name and information of their kids. Someone puts a prompt up on Twitter and says, hey, what was the name of your first dog and your grandmother's birthday?
Yeah.
And people post it. The idea of rampant posting and how that has impacted security and how that creates this really interesting question to build a story around, which is, what if someone wanted to use that information for evil? What if when you were gone from your house, that means that there could be someone else there? It's just that very literal fear of the loopholes and gaps that people actively create in their lives, intentionally or not, and how a game can draw attention to that and maybe encourage someone to wait a little bit longer before posting that pic, or overshare a little bit less on the internet as a result. It's something that certainly was already a lingering fear for me, but especially as I started to do more research for the game, became more pertinent. So I think a really good example of this is, are you familiar with like geotags? The trend now of you can attach a geotag to something.
Yeah.
You can look it up on your phone and now find it.
Right.
Anyone can plant that anywhere. And so people were noting, hey, I found a geotag under my car that doesn't belong to me. Someone was tracking me to my house. And in another case, there is a package.
It's like an actual like AirTag type of hardware, right?
AirTag type of hardware. Very easy to slip in to anywhere. Slip it into someone's purse or pocket or underneath their car in the wheel well. That is a thing that's happening right now. The package fraud, the reverse package fraud that's happening right now, where people will leave in an Amazon branded box a Ring camera or a toy, and people open up their door, they see a Ring camera or a toy, and they think, oh, I got one over on Amazon. They gave it to me for free. I'm not going to tell them.
Yeah.
And so they put it in their house, but actually someone has installed a back door to that toy, meaning they now have a camera inside your house, or that Ring camera, meaning they can see what you're seeing. And they also have access to your Wi-Fi because you hooked up the device to Wi-Fi. I don't want to promote fear, despite the fact that in certain ways we do live in a scary world, but I do very much think that intentionality and mindfulness is helpful in every arena of life. So, yeah, next time you see a suspicious package that's too good to be true, maybe think twice, and maybe think twice because you played Life Eater.
No, that's a very interesting point. Like the voluntary ignorance that people are more and more every day with this tech and all these all these available tools that we have. People don't really give it a second thought. Like there was a couple of things that you brought up that was super interesting. Like I think maybe a decade ago, we hear about these studies, in these psych classes about, all right, what's the difference between you and a murderer, right? And they had these exercises of like, all right, if you were to plan a murder, how would you do it to get rid of the body without being caught? And it was like people were pretty elaborate and were able to kind of think through the crime. And the result of the study was not about like, how to kill people, but it was more of like the difference between an actual murderer and you is very minimal, except that your mental state disallows you from carrying through such a crime, right? Your moral compass, your ethics is the only thing that's preventing you from doing something like that. But we all feel anger, we all feel resentment, we all feel these same feelings. And it's just that moment of clarity that really prevents you from going all the way through. So like your game, the idea of like flipping the perspective and really thinking through about, if you were to do it, how would you do it, and bring awareness of like how it feels and how vulnerable we are now more than before, which is a very interesting point. It's like you would think with all this technology, we're safer than ever, but it kind of is the opposite. It's like it's much easier to track someone, much easier to stalk them. The idea of like Amazon Prime is every day's Christmas, everyone loves gifts, really allows somebody, right, who has criminal intent to really do harm with very minimal effort. I don't think a lot of people think about that when they're taking their kids to school, how open they are. It is very scary to be every day stressed about certain things. Obviously, there's a limit. You got to live your life, right? But it also helps kind of understand awareness of these things that are happening more than ever. I feel like I was very surprised. It really opened my eyes being in Houston, Texas, seeing all those Amber Alerts throughout the day. And when I'm for California, I had no idea, the realities of just a few states over. And that's probably happening in my state, right? We're not talking about a different country. It's like we're in the same place, time, same types of people. But people just have like this ignorance that they live day to day, thinking that we're safer than ever. And I think what Life Eater offers is like more of that. I think what you're trying to do, with these things is just like, let's flip the script. Really think about it. How easy it is to really carry through with something like this, an exercise, right?
I think there's also one of my favorite things about, from a development perspective, expressing the philosophy is you never get to orchestrate the moment of abduction, because the horrifying reality of pulling someone from their life is not the point of the game. Again, we The point is not to wallow. This is the framing and this is the game in certain regards. But if the point was that, we would make the moment of abduction and choosing your tools a piece of that mechanical and gameplay loop. But we didn't. What instead we do is once you have investigated your target's life, you have to get a prerequisite amount of information about them before you can hit the big red button and abduct them. And when you hit the abduct button, it cuts to, hey, now they're just in your basement. And what you see is a meat constellation.
Mm-hmm.
And you're essentially given this intimacy test of like, okay, how old were they? What color hair did they have? How did they have a commute to work or not? Did they have kids? You get this essentially a cosmic multiple choice question framed as the things that you do for a ritual that you're like, okay, so I cracked the 22nd rib because they get less than 6 hours of sleep a night. And that is weird and grotesque, but it makes the wider point through via mechanics and framing in the total loop of this isn't a game where the greatest sin is having kidnapped someone. The greatest sin is beforehand the ways in which you intruded upon their lives and made them unsafe beforehand. You ripped away their sense of privacy and their sense of agency in the process. So the final quote unquote interaction you have with the target should be based entirely around that. Mm-hmm. And we actually just did an update for the game that we had a binary set of options before, where you basically just take note of, do they have a commute or not? You basically will can mechanically, methodically go through the scenario. In the new update, you have these questions can have variance. So when it asks how old they are, it isn't just, are they less than 30 years old? It might ask, are they older than 60? And then you in the moment have to go, oh, dang, okay. Did I actually note their name? Did I notice their general time span and lifetime? The idea of, again, this game being to a degree about intimacy. And when intimacy is had with you without your knowledge or consent, and you're like, don't want this guy knowing all this stuff about my life, how open our lives are to that type of intrusion now. All those things, again, culminate in a game loop that also expresses the wider philosophical point that it's a kidnapping simulator that isn't about the simulation of kidnapping, but about the wider societal dynamics as well as methodical processes that end up altering both you and your target in the process.
Yeah, man. Have to ask you about this, man. What kind of research did you have to go through? Because obviously you're not like, you're gonna have to rely on some facts, right, to kind of like really design some gameplay concepts around the subject matter, right? Especially now, I feel like kidnapping is it's a booming business, right? Which is a probably insensitive way to frame it, but like it seems to have to be more of a problem now than before, or at least the awareness is a bigger thing than before.
Yeah. But human trafficking is on the rise, as well as awareness of it, and the awareness accompanying that rise is the one thing we can point to as at least a comforting sign and hopefully an incitement for change.
Yeah. So if you don't mind kind of diving into what you learned in your research, comparing to, what you knew before diving into the research.
For Life Eater, I'd say that a lot of the research around kidnapping actually was not helpful. Because kidnappings, unfortunately, are mundane. Most kidnappings are perpetrated by someone who is close to the victim.
Wow.
So it will be a estranged dad. It'll be an uncle. It'll be a neighbor. There's all kinds of Netflix true crime documentaries that will tell you as much. It was always usually someone in the life of the person to start with. I believe that's the case for 90% of people who are kidnapped, if not more. The research then around kidnapping and methods of kidnapping don't necessarily give you a foundation for at least a versatile game offering a large mechanical and narrative space for the dev team to bring to life.
Yeah.
So what ended up actually being really useful was just thinking more so about, I have to remember the exact phrase for it, but it's essentially the idea of intrusion testing. So you have people who their entire job is they're told to, go to this bank, figure out how difficult is it for you to get into the vault and put something there. You have a week to prepare. At some point during that week, you're going to hit this bank. The people inside the bank probably have not been told beforehand. And so they're basically hackers and intrusion testers for good, showing, hey, so I didn't even have to go that hard. I just noticed that the janitor wears a nondescript blue jumpsuit. If he enters through this entrance, there's not even a key card lock. I bought a blue jumpsuit from a nearby store, walked through that door, went down these 2 hallways, asked for help to find a thing, was able to, in the process, take a thing that let me get inside of a room, plant the object, and prove that I was able to successfully intrude this location. Here's the 8 things you need to do to make this location more secure in the future. Learning about those types of processes, learning about new types of crimes, especially in the information age. One of the key mechanics in the game, or actions that the player can do in order to reveal information about their target, is to stalk their social media. And it takes 6 hours, I believe, of in-game time. And it's just you literally, the image we hope to create in players' heads is your in-game character is just scrolling through Instagram, Twitter, Facebook for 6 hours.
Yeah.
And that gives you so much information in the process. So yeah, research mainly looked not at the world of kidnapping, but at the, again, world of where and how information and access is distributed these days, as well as how people, for good and wicked purposes, already take advantage of that now.
Yeah, there's definitely so many things to kind of aid in creating crime. Like, it just feels like pretty imbalanced, to be honest. Just I mean, privacy issues have always been dominant, right? In the last decade.
Also, real quick, penetration testing is the term. So it's penetration testing, or a pen test is how there's people who do that for a living, and they are all cool as hell. Every time you see a YouTube video where they will do a lecture about it, it's the neatest gosh dang thing.
So the frame of penetration testing is about invasion of facilities, invasion of stocking. What exactly, can you break it down, what it means? So
it's often it's known as penetration testing, also known as pen testing or ethical hacking. That definition is from hackerone.com. The idea is for both physical locations as well as just sometimes it's just your network. Someone will you hire a person or a firm to test out where your vulnerabilities lie, and they show you where those vulnerabilities lie so that you can fix them. That type of information, learning about how people went through that process, is not just deeply revelatory and interesting, but also ended up being quite helpful for the game, because if someone can use that for good, they can also use it for evil.
Yeah, there's been like a recent like home invasions in California. I know, like, across the states, there's been a lot of, like, especially around Beverly Hills, right? Pretty high tech home invasion burglaries that's been happening around Hollywood. Basically just turning down the Wi-Fi completely shuts down, like, surveillance of a lot of these homes, and it's been pretty organized. Yeah, there's been like a lot that's been happening in the recent months, all over the states, and they think it's some kind of organized crime that's happening because the way they're doing is super efficient. They know exactly where the surveillance are, or they just turn off the Wi-Fi. And a lot of combative or ways to kind of fight against it is just people just saying to hardwire, your surveillance instead of just
new fear unlocked. Cool.
Yeah, it's very interesting, and it's but it's those kind of scenarios that kind of highlight what you're talking about. Like, no one thinks past that, right? It's like, all right, I got surveillance. My home is secure. I can see myself on the camera. I'm away from home. I see it. Oh, shit, right? It took them one step. Turn off your Wi-Fi, and then that whole, system is completely infiltrated, right? And you're completely vulnerable. But it's like those type of things where our medium can really help educate on like really flipping the perspective and really think through these issues. Like, if I really want to break into your house, if I want to break into my own house, how would I do it? Right. But I don't think a lot of people think past a certain point just to kind of prevent harm. Right.
To your earlier point about the difference between you and a murderer tests that were and psychological studies that were conducted in the 80s. One of my favorite quotes is, "A lock only deters an honest man."
Mm.
And that's part of why games are also really exciting, because you play a game like Deus Ex.
Yes.
And you get to problem solve in a way you never do in real life, or where you only speculatively do it in real life.
Yeah.
To accomplish a goal, which you could feasibly stack several boxes on top of each other to climb into an event in real life.
Right.
But doing that to infiltrate a conspiracy and save the world is a unique video game fantasy.
Yes.
So, yeah, I wouldn't say, there is a piece of Life Eater that is simply telling this dark story and narrative, and that is looking at how do you build a horror fantasy kidnapping simulator. Then in the process, we realized we were breaking new genre space. But a piece of it is also, to your point, education and discussion. One of my favorite things in reading some of the reviews is that people talked about ways that they changed looking at their own lives, because it's not even based off of seeing vulnerabilities in other people's lives, but seeing people's lives cut up into schedule chunks. Because for those who are not familiar with the game, the analog horror UI based interface that you interact with looks a lot like a video editing program.
Mm-hmm.
So seeing someone else's life parceled out into chunks like commute, browses internet, wakes up screaming, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
That caused people to actively think like, man, from the outside looking in, how would my life appear? Is this the life I want to live?
Mm-hmm. And
I didn't mean to make people so existential, but it is really cool to create the door for people to have that consideration. I think that's a highlight of all of Strange Scaffold's projects, no matter how pulpy or weird or controversial the subject matter. We're never existing on the strength of, oh, let's make a game about stock photo dogs. We aren't just giving the joke. We're using the joke as an entrance point to connect with people in hopefully a really human and meaningful way.
Do you mind kind of talking more about like the player feedback that you guys been getting in terms of the impact of the game? What have you guys been seeing that you're kind of either adding to the game, altering the game design while making it, or even thinking about after release, right?
I'd say the player feedback, the biggest fear we had coming in is that people wouldn't get it.
Mm-hmm.
We made a game on time and on budget to fulfill a somewhat controversial brief, which is horror fantasy kidnapping sim, kidnapping people to delay the end of the world. Also, your god may not exist.
Mm-hmm.
The concept there is out there, and that is part of what gets attention, but it's also the thing that makes it most likely for the audience to misunderstand what you're making, most likely for the audience to look at from afar and say, man, that is a cool thing you did. I'm not going to play that because that's dark. My mom initially did not play the game on launch because she was like, I don't know if I want that in my head. I think I'd get too obsessed with it and I'd be really excited, and then I'd just be thinking about kidnapping people all day. She ultimately didn't have to play a level and enjoying it, which I was really happy about. But I'd say in general, the thing that we were so grateful for is that we released the game and people just got it. There are people who said, I don't know if this is a game that should exist, which is an opinion I can respect and appreciate. And those folks are entitled to it. But for the most part, both critics and players understood what we were bringing to life and that it was more than its grotesque framing. And so the reactions have been, we expected maybe like 4 out of 10s. We got a 9 out of 10. We got 8 out of 10s and 6s and 7s. That perfect sweet spot for you pulled off an interesting thing that said what it wanted to say. So I'd say the reaction has been positive. A lot of people have understood the game or come away with new insights about themselves. Some of the more negative or mixed feedback did come from more binary pieces of the ritual, especially because one of the early questions was, how many times does your target go to the bathroom in a day? Mm-hmm. And just because of the way we assembled those target schedules, it basically didn't become useful for most people. It's just another piece of information. So we swapped that out with a far more interesting question that has, especially in a new setup where there's some dynamism in how these questions are asked, it has the thing of, hey, what age are they? Mm-hmm. If they're younger than this, do this. If they're older than this, do that. We are being reactive and we fix controller support. We are looking for ways to accentuate what the game is doing. That will culminate in the release of an endless mode within the next few weeks, where you have an endless list of targets that flips the core dynamic of the game on its head, because a lot of the core game as it stands is you're given vague information and you have to find a target that aligns with that information, as well as have enough intimacy with their schedule and who they are to be able to successfully complete your ritual. In the endless mode, we flip the information and say a very specific piece of information, like find the lawyer or find the teacher. But the information you get on that schedule is far less specific than it is in the story mode. So rather than say, go to courthouse, it just says work. And you have to figure out from other pieces of their lives and assumptions you can make about the overall context. Okay, this person is working really long hours. They're constantly hitting the bar. Are they a lawyer or are they a different aligned archetype? It gives you, again, a lot of the core challenge and intuition that you're allowed to apply within the story constructed scenarios, but in an endless format. So that'll be coming out soon, and we're really excited about how players will react to that. But in general, I can say that we made a really wild thing that took very big swings, and people got it. Mm-hmm. And at the end of the day, you can't really ask for much more than that.
Yeah, I mean, like, you had something to say, and you said it. And I feel like the most interesting games are always the better ones. Especially, with a smaller team. That's the fun of it, right? To explore things that most other developers probably won't touch. Were there like different considerations when for cultural perspectives when you guys were designing kidnapping elements of the game? Did you even think about those type of things or put it into the game?
By cultural, do you mean things like for lack of a better term, what are the optics of kidnapping this type of person or from this culture, or what names we put in here?
Right. Yeah. Like, was it easier? Was it harder? I mean, did any of that like go into the consideration in designing it, or everyone
It
was
was a
fair game,
lot.
or was just
It was a
age?
lot.
You know.
It was a lot easier because we did. It was a lot easier than it would have been otherwise, because we built from the ground up with those concerns. Kind of like accessibility, we don't
Yeah.
usually have font text that you can, and font sizes that you can adjust manually in our games.
Right.
It takes dev time. It takes testing. Would I love to, in an ideal world, have that in all of our projects? Yes. Do we usually have time and cash for that? No. But what we do is, from the beginning of development, we say, what is the accessible font size, or the closest we can get to it, and build our entire interface around that from the ground up.
Mhm.
Which I think if you can get both that and multiple options, you're hitting the gold standard. So because we have this care for and recognition of cultural elements and how that impacts a person's perception of the game early on, and that's deeply embedded in all of the teams at Strange Scaffold. Yeah, when we were inputting names into the random generator, we were like, okay, we want to be really careful of names from this culture or that culture, or that one culture is overrepresented. We
Mhm.
want to the idea of someone being a religious leader in their community is, we don't want to lock off the possibility of someone being a community leader or religious leader. But when we're thinking about occupations for our targets,
Yeah.
thinking about what happens when that becomes specific or is identified with certain cultures that already experience marginalization or hatred, targeting in general, all of those were really deep, active, collaborative conversations from the beginning of the project. And I think it's part of the reason that the heat that we got on launch, from what heat we did get, was all, should this game exist, and
Mhm.
not, oh my gosh, can you believe that they made a game where every single time you're kidnapping someone, it's someone from the queer community.
Mhm.
We, with an aware and empathetic dev team, we were able to head off all of those things very early, which, given especially my dev work on, again, projects from indie to AAA elsewhere, when I see that doesn't happen
Mhm.
for people with much more time and resources than our team has, I do recognize that, yes, stuff happens, but also that is a failure of recognition and of creating a team culture to uplift those issues early enough to head off those disasters. Because if you have that team and if you have that environment, people will tell you and notice those things long before you get there.
Mhm. Like the player perspective, right? There's an uphill battle. Just like, all right, just play the game. You know, what was the publisher side of things? Just pitching the game. Like, what was that like? To like, hey, I have this idea. You know, what was that process? Just gonna peek behind the curtains. What you guys have to go through to get the game made.
We were going to self-publish
Yeah.
because I said, this is a game that is in alignment with the Strange Scaffold motto, which is better, faster, cheaper, and healthier.
Yeah.
It is something we can efficiently produce and can be very impactful, and
Yeah.
that has both a gameplay loop and a narrative hook and a hopefully impact on the world that I can stand behind.
Yeah.
We're going to make this regardless of whether or not someone gives us cash, and
Yeah.
it can be produced efficiently enough that we can self-fund it, regardless of what happens with El Paso elsewhere. And so I was talking to a work colleague, Faisal Sethi, founder of Frosty Pop. I was working on Pillow Champ, and still am working on Pillow Champ, their upcoming really cool cross-platform fighting game, which is, it's a game where you fight with pillows. That's
Yeah.
it's an entire society and culture kind of arms style, if we're arms and Splatoon style, that has been revolutionized by the idea of organized pillow fighting, touching every piece of culture. I, as part of the things, the number of things I did to keep Strange Scaffold alive through 2023, I was working on Pillow Champ. I had become friends with the founder of the studio making Pillow Champ. And at one point we were just having a conversation. I was like, yeah, after El Paso Elsewhere, I know what we're going to do and the overall things that we're going to work on to survive this space where the market is at. We're going to make a horror fantasy kidnapping sim. It's going to work like this. No one would ever publish it, so we're going to do it ourselves. And I think literally a moment went by and he went like, well, I would publish it. That sounds good. And you make things on time and on budget, and I trust your team. And that culminated in the 5-game deal that we announced earlier this year, where a port of El Paso Elsewhere is in development. Life Eater is the first release from this collaboration. It's a horror fantasy kidnapping sim. After that, we have a fast-paced covert revenge thriller FPS that's coming out later this year. We have a after-hours library horror game, and then we have a co-op kaiju horror cooking game.
Nice.
All of those things are flowing as a result of collaboration with Frosty Pop, because they took the somewhat radical move of looking at our track record and looking at the things we were making and evaluating games that we had on the horizon and that we believed in, and saying, I believe in this team to make these things. And I believe in this team to make this wild kidnapping game that they are not going to destroy both of our reputations or the prospect of releasing video games without government oversight in the process. And so I'm real ride or die for Frosty Pop at this point, because you don't see that type of trust and ongoing collaboration and vote of confidence given towards even the heaviest hitters of our medium. You might see a big publisher work with someone multiple times, but the formalization of, no, these people have what it takes.
Yeah.
And also, even if they're doing something absurd, they're going to do it in a way that is meaningful and responsible.
Yeah.
You don't see that in games, and it meant the world that Frosty Pop put that towards us, and I hope we did and continue to do that trust justice.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a value that doesn't get talked about enough, right? I think, and I complain a lot about this exact issue because on several points, right? The first point is like this idea of people getting funding, right? And then going out there as if they hit the lottery. And it's like, hold on, guys. You're giving this money to make the game, right? This is the easiest part of the journey, right? And a lot of people just celebrate, as soon as they get investment, as soon as they get funding, it's like, oh, it's game over, it's done, we did it, celebrate, high five. But like the business of game making is a lot more brutal than that, right? Hence why the marketing conditions that we're going through right now, and not enough credibility is given to people who are actually finishing games, right? Shipping games. Who would have thought that shipping game is good for business in the game industry, right? And I still feel like that's not talked about enough.
Yeah, I mean, that's part of the reason why the games is in the really weird space where it is right now. Not only did we have this hyper escalationist perspective that's taking hold across all of entertainment, where no one wants to take a profitable bet. They just want to take the biggest bet they can. So it's not about profitability. It's not about whether or not it satisfies what players need or want or are asking for. It's scale. Scale is king. And within that perspective, when teams are looking for funding, I'm seeing teams that have 10, 15, 20 years of experience working together, struggling to get funding to ship a game the same way that a student team does.
Yeah.
And that feels deeply broken. And it's part of the reason why games struggles to ship anything on time and on budget. Outside of wider production concerns, which I've spoken about in a lot of different arenas, we celebrate shipping, but we do not prioritize it, and we don't value it, and we don't make that core tenet a big part of discussing how and where we put funding. So we're always starting from scratch. We're always hoping that this next one is going to turn out all right because we don't create the conditions for it to happen consistently in the first place. And players suffer in the process.
Yeah. Let's kind of talk more about that, right? The marketing condition that we're undergoing. I co-sign with you with this crazy idea with investors and publishers that there's like you either a small project or these mega scale project, and I hear this all the time. If your budget's anywhere in between, they don't want to hear about it. It's like a weird spot where nobody wants. It's like that makes no sense. It's like go big or go home. It's like there's a reason why our industry is kind of known for failing more than succeeding in terms of just project being lit, right? This marketing condition of 2023, hopefully we're starting to see the tail end of it. I feel like it's getting there, after June, July is what I'm hearing, maybe, right? But like it's been a long stretch of a year and a half of like me and you probably have a lot of friends that are still looking for jobs, and would love to kind of hear your perspective, what you think is going on, what you're seeing, how to prevent something like this, hopefully on a personal level or even as a leader of a company.
The big term I've heard is survive until 25. And unfortunately, I don't believe that to be the case. Because if you look at where the medium is at, business is booming. People love buying and playing games still.
Yeah.
They buy games both in original and licensed IP, which is something that Hollywood and music and all the other people are struggling with. If something isn't associated with a big name, they struggle to sell it in games. That's the status quo still. We are in a golden place as far as where the quote unquote market is concerned. Because more people than ever are playing more games than ever and have built an ecosystem of appreciating those games and wanting to find what developers will bring to life next. Unfortunately, the business is rotting, and that's what we're seeing. The business is rotting while the market is booming, which means the systemic decisions that brought us to where we are now, that resulted in 2023, are not being reversed, partially because we aren't receiving a hard stop at a reset point. If the entire market crashed, that would have been awful. But everyone would have had to pick up the pieces and say, okay, what do we do now? What we were doing before doesn't work. Publishers who refuse to take anything but the largest bet, though, when they take a bet that hits, it's like a jackpot in a casino. What we're seeing is a casino style gambling mindset. And so when you have a thing that you hit max bet 8 times and it only hit once, that once is still going to unfortunately rule and is ruling across investment sectors of games to say, well, we got to hit max bet again, because what if it does it? What if it happens again?
Yeah.
So the systemic factors that brought us where we are, even outside of the impact from the wider economy of things like how rising interest rates impacted gaming. Will there be ways in which 2025, or once we get past June and July this year, things may ease up on people? Yes, just because money's still being made, games still got to get made, games need to get signed and are getting signed. They were getting signed even in 2023.
Yeah.
We're just still going to deal with the ongoing systemic consequences because all the factors that brought us here are systemic. It wasn't an unprecedented meteor that struck the industry and now we're all recovering from it. It's a lot of people made a lot of decisions that unfortunately are not being reversed or having their base assumptions corrected as we go into the next few years. So I don't know when or if games, quote unquote, recovers.
Yeah.
Because the systemic factors to create an environment where players are consistently seeing high quality, sustainably made products, those don't exist and aren't existing. And to answer the last piece of your question, for what people can do as leaders and as individuals to confront that environment, I can only say what Strange Scaffold is doing, which is detaching ourselves from entities that we do not trust to utilize responsible and sustainable business practices. If someone is only willing to invest in us if we go max bet, then we aren't going to go max bet, because max bet doesn't guarantee a good game.
Yeah.
If we can't use the processes that we have found and continue to iterate on and evolve to make great games consistently and quickly without destroying people in the process, if someone doesn't want to fund us on those bases, then we don't work with those people and we don't make those games. And so we're working with Frosty Pop. We have a couple of unannounced partners who they're actively supporting our processes. And so we're going to work with them and the rest of the stuff. Or once those funding agreements end, if there is no further prospect of partnership, we'll make our little 5-figure games and continue to bring things to life that no one else could in our safe little shelter, because the alternative is risking the lives of developers and risking the player experience simply to satisfy assumptions which are only situationally true.
That's a fantastic endpoint, I feel like, for what we've been talking about. This is the 1 hour mark. I want to thank you, man, for coming on, spending the time. Hopefully,
Thanks so much for having me.
It was quick and fun. This is the part where I shut up, handed the mic over to you to talk directly to the listeners and audience out there about what you want to talk about, promote, give attention to. Go for it.
2 quick things. You're going to want to keep an eye on Strange Scaffold. We have a lot of cool things upcoming in the future. We have Life Eater, obviously, which is now out on Steam and itch. You can pick it up right now. People say it's quite good, and it's like nothing else you've ever played. It's a horror fantasy kidnapping sim. We have I Am Your Beast, a fast-paced co-revenge thriller that we're going to be talking about in more detail later this year, and that will also be coming out later this year. Lots of games getting made in ways that are hopefully sustainable, exuberant, and provide something you've never seen before or never seen quite this way. You can follow our social channels at Strange Scaffold or me at Rit Nelson if you'd like to hear me ramble more about making games that are great in a way that makes sense. Outside of that, Defender's Quest 2, a game that I was the co-lead on, is also coming out in the near future. That game is a sequel to an indie darling 10 years in the making. I helped to bring that thing to a point where it can ship, and it's one of my favorite stories I've ever written. So wishlist that on Steam today. Finally, we're talking about outside of plugs, despite what you might have heard with the Sunshine Shuffle controversy. It's harder to teach children not to gamble than to teach them to gamble. Children have gambling in their hearts. Dave & Buster's understands this, which is why they've rolled out their recent awards and loyalties programs that allow you to bet on arcade games and carnival attractions as you play them. And this is why my PSA for everyone when it relates to child gambling is, would you rather them learn to gamble from the wider world, or would you like to be the one to teach them to gamble? You can take the future into your own hands and teach them how to play blackjack, poker, and all those other casino games responsibly. So
yeah.
Take life by the horns. Teach a child to gamble today.
Yeah. Awesome. I love it, man. I love the subject matter you guys are tackling. I feel like it's is very impactful. It gets me thinking a lot about things that I don't really think about. And I think as adults, navigating through all of this, it's good to stop and have awareness of what's going on, because I before it's too late, obviously, right? So I think it's been a very intriguing talk. Love to continue talking anytime you want to come back on. But thank you guys. See you guys next week.
Thanks for having me.